and attest to needing preparedness tips beforehand just to deal with things like the winter storms or disasters like the winter storms. Please visit this website to gather extensive information and join groups for discussion and activities regarding preparedness. Be disaster aware and take time to prepare. That's the slogan used by the Mary Prepare-thon. As we are in the midst of disasters happening all around us, specifically now the winter storms, and preparing for a tornado season soon along with other disasters to include fires, wildfires, flooding, hurricanes, and potential other man-made disasters. We acknowledge the need for us as individuals and our communities to be prepared for what happens before, during, and after a disaster. Let's define disaster. A common understanding what makes a disaster is when an event that causes human suffering or creates needs that survivors cannot meet. We want to refer you to the natural or man-made disasters like the one we saw in the slides previous to this one, and not specifically talk about those things that happen to us every day, our own personal disasters. And yes, we are planning internationally and domestically for possible terror attacks as we speak. As an example of what type of disaster we plan for, here in this area along the Gulf Coast where I live, we plan for the hurricanes 6 months out of the year. We may also experience other hazards like flooding, tornadoes, not many snowstorms though, and other man-made disasters. Other disasters may include technological disasters, earthquakes, a superstorm Sandy, which communities, believe it or not, are still recovering from. Take a look at the devastation after Superstorm Sandy. And you know, if many of that happened there, then they are still recovering. As we identify what to do before and after disaster, let's start by briefly reviewing the stages of disaster with you. We sometimes call them stages, we sometimes refer to it as phases. In stage 1, at the top of this diagram, is the warning or anticipation phase. This phase begins with the first indicators that a disaster is going to occur. It continues through the period of time when the actual disaster occurs or the danger is over and the warning is called off. Preparedness activities are happening at this time, maybe not as active as in the second stage. And remember, there are some disasters that occur without a warning. In stage 2 or phase 2 is when the disaster physically hits the community. Rescue work is underway. Police and other authority figures are sought out for guidance and help. Search and rescue is going on at this time. Agencies such as the Red Cross and others open shelters to house and feed survivors. And then we move to that stage 3 or phase 3. Now that the emergency has immediately passed, unsolicited volunteers who are eager to help began to arrive on the scene. Assessments of property damage and loss are initiated. Agencies and organizations begin to communicate with one another, and situation reports are entered. Initial meetings may be organized to share information. And then we move forward to that 4th stage. The community tends to its medical and survival needs. Those displaced by the disaster seek temporary housing. The goal is to provide disaster survivors at this time with safe, sanitary, secure, and functional housing. And then we move over into that fifth phase. Rescue and relief continues while the community is coming together to help one another. For example, food, clothing, and emergency medical care are being provided to those in need. Donations will be delivered to the most visible relief agencies. People will be desperately trying either to gain access to or leave the damaged area. In the absence of facts, exaggeration about the loss of life may abound. People motivated by greed will find ways to exploit vulnerable groups. Looting may take place. And in the sixth and final stage, long-term reconstruction takes place. Rebuilding of infrastructure is underway. Mutual mental health and spiritual care are offered for survivors and relief workers. There's a gradual adjustment for those impacted by the disaster. Local and regional organizations work together throughout the rebuild process. Nonprofit agencies, community organizations, faith-based organizations, and ministerial alliances will organize and collaborate. Faith-based disaster response agencies advocate for vulnerable populations, especially with regard to social justice and development concerns. These are the stages of disaster, and in most cases, each stage is not clear and distinct. Many will overlap throughout the process. As we talk about disaster preparedness, we want to ensure that we're all talking about the same thing. Here are a few terms in disaster that are important to understand. A disaster. We have already defined disaster as an event that causes human suffering or creates needs that survivors cannot alleviate without spiritual, monetary, material, and/or physical assistance. An emergency is a sudden, generally unexpected occurrence or set of circumstances that demands immediate attention. Hazards are human or natural events or forces that represent a threat to vulnerable populations. Vulnerability, the measure of cultural, social, economic, and environmental factors and unsafe conditions that put people at risk of a disaster. And when we refer to natural disaster, we're referring to largely involve the geological and climatic hazards. The fire in Breezy Point, New Jersey during Sandy. Technology caused or man-made disasters, or those disasters caused by the application or misapplication of human technology. When we refer to mitigation, we refer to that process when we initiate and activate plans that will make the disaster less harsh, severe, or violent. Resiliency is the promotion and activation of plans that will increase the families and communities' ability to recover quickly from those disasters. And then all of us probably are familiar with the concept of emergency management in our community, which is a comprehensive emergency disaster management system requiring the cooperative efforts of individuals, the private sector, government at all levels, community-based organizations, and faith-based organizations. So again, these are some terminologies that we will use, and in many instances in your community you will hear if and when and where a disaster happens. We defined just a moment ago that hazards, what a hazard is. It's the intersection of hazards and people in harm's way makes it a disaster. Now, a floodplain without people and property would not experience a disaster because there is no threat to life. Look at the definition of hazards. Unsafe conditions for persons in neighborhoods least likely to be able to plan for a disaster or recover from disaster with the resources that are available. It is important to determine the hazards that are present in your community, and we will be going over possible hazards that may affect your area. Hazards, again, dangerous locations, substandard buildings. Inadequate infrastructure is a major threat if not addressed properly. A tiny leak in a roof can become a hazard in heavy rain, which we're having in the southeastern part of the country, southwest and southeastern part of the country this week. Another example might be electrical wiring that is exposed to the elements. The building that you live in is a good place to start determining if there are potential hazards. Make sure you shore up your home and businesses and make necessary preparation to lessen the impact of the disaster on your physical structure, your home, your business. We said that hazard plus vulnerability equals disaster. So what makes a population vulnerable? Who are the most vulnerable in a disaster? Those living in the conditions we just mentioned, substandard housing, floodplains, that can make a population vulnerable. Those whose homes are not being maintained well because of other factors, that make them vulnerable, including their economic status, their health status, their age, their disabilities, their lack of communication skills, lack of adequate communication vehicles, their isolation from the main infrastructure. All of that could make a community or a people vulnerable. There may be specific groups of persons that are at risk that you have identified in your community. So once we've identified what the hazards are and what makes our community vulnerable, we can best plan to prepare, prevent, and respond to disasters. So together, hand in hand, we plan to prevent, prepare, and respond to disasters. Let's look at personal preparedness. The American Red Cross, which is found in or near all of our local communities, developed and promotes a comprehensive personal and family preparedness plan. You can find a complete plan at the website listed on this slide. And if you can't see it very well, it's www.redcross.org/locations/home=family. We must remind you that in preparing for you and your family, we encourage each one to have supplies already positioned in your home to last for 72 hours after an impact, so that you will be able to sustain yourselves before external help can get to you. This certainly would be necessary if you were cut off by land, sea, or air. Remember to pack all of those items that you need to sustain your life. Food, water, medication, first aid supplies. You might also want to take small items for children's entertainment. Full charge cell phones, notebooks, iPads, other communication gadgets, which you may or may not be able to use them depending on the status of electricity. Please include other items that may be of a necessity for you, especially any items that you can grab and go with quickly, like your medical aids, such as braces for backs, for legs. You know what to do. You know what you need as an individual. Again, that's about personal preparedness. The question always comes up in terms of what do we do for pets? Plan for your pets. Know what shelters are pet friendly or not. What plans have the local emergency planning commission made for pets? Ask family members not affected to maybe pet sit. But do what's necessary before a disaster happens to have a plan in place for your pets. Where pre-planning occurs and shelters are pre-identified, please obtain the information by contacting your Emergency Operations Center or your local emergency management agency. Shelters in your community could be schools, churches, civic centers, city halls, etc., and in many instances have been deemed safe for specific disasters. In hurricane-prone areas, they are pre-identified and built to sustain certain international building codes and can withstand high winds. Again, know your hazards and the planning for each. Shelters can be storm shelters or safe rooms even in your homes. Here are some resources needed before and after disaster that will lessen the impact of the disaster on you and your family. Having that disaster survival kit. Have handy the local fire department, hospitals, health department, ambulance service, emergency management agency, Red Cross, have those numbers already identified. Photocopy on your phone or otherwise use the numbers listed in your local phone directory as emergency contact information. Discover which of these entities have apps available for their published information. Choose to download the apps. As you gather this information, also prepare your kit to hold pertinent documents of personal identification, deeds to your home, insurance paperwork, whether it's your medical insurance, your homeowner's insurance, your fire insurance. Have your bank records, school records for children, immunization records, passports, birth certificates. All of those are pertinent documents that you want to have together in a safe place that you will be able to access either before or after the disaster. Consider making a copy to place in your kit so that they will be there just in case you're not able to grab and go with the original documents. Take pictures of any important information you deem necessary and store in your phone, and maybe a backup might be to store on flash or jump drives and place in your kit. Make sure you have numbers of each family members to contact, and each family member have shared their numbers with each other. Family members should decide on a meeting place if families are displaced from their residence, or establish a central family contact for all members to call into so that you can maintain that line of communication with your family. If all else fails, the Red Cross and other organizations may connect family members through 1-800 numbers, emails, and other communication networks. And yes, now we can use Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, texting, and all those social media resources to keep the connections going. Please jot down your local emergency management agency number and the FEMA number. And of course, you see there the FEMA number. Please review as much as you can any information you can find on various websites regarding disaster preparedness. Make contact with local entities and stay tuned to local information given before and during a disaster. This will give you your next steps, whether to evacuate when an order is issued, whether to shelter in place, when and where to apply for immediate assistance. Being prepared for the disaster event will certainly lessen the impact of the disaster on you and your family and will assist you in a quicker recovery after the disaster. As individuals and families prepare for disasters, your local, state, and national responders also prepare to ensure that they are able to respond to the needs of the residents of the affected communities. Most communities plan response drill and activities annually, sometimes quarterly, depending upon the hazards that exist within their region. There may be local, regional, and national conferences. Some of these conferences might be State Be Ready conferences, hurricane conferences, emergency operations conferences, national VOAD conferences, and then state and sometimes joint VOAD conferences. I know that we are all looking forward to the National VOAD Conference in New Orleans the week of May 11th. The conferences generally highlight what the response to recent disasters have been, as well as what are the best practices identified. After action reports or hot washes or other means by which a community derives new information for planning and response purposes. The disaster responders and organizations are constantly trying to mitigate the impact of an event and are making strides in preparing the community to become more resilient after a disaster. Hazard mitigation is considered during a response, and FEMA may release hazard mitigation grants to the region affected. The activities associated with this kind of grant will certainly be designed to create an environment that either prevents or mitigates the disastrous conditions in the future. Various training events are held annually, preparing responders to be ready for the relief and recovery needs of the community. These trainings are used for the purpose of preparing the whole community. However, some of the training might be hazard specific and certainly can be designed for a specific reason. Tabletop exercises and drills are very commonly used to also prepare the community. Let's spend some time discussing the benefits of communities being prepared. What should be happening following a disaster event? The community's response will depend on some quick gathering of accurate and comprehensive information. The information will come from all active organizations after disasters. Some of them may be federal, nonprofit, or civic organization. Keep everything that you come across as it may be useful throughout the process. And of course, that's our Associate Director, Barry Shade, having dialogue with a survivor. Now, we're ready for some questions. Suzanne, do we have any questions?
Sandra, I don't see any questions at this time.
Oh, well, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Hopefully we've been quite clear then. Okay. Moving right along then, Suzanne. And just let me remind those who are on this webinar, if you do have questions, as we said earlier, you can jot them down in the box on your panel to the right, and we will ask questions again during this presentation or at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Let's talk more about gathering the information we talked about in our last slide, as getting as much information about what has happened so that you can be prepared and make necessary plans for recovery. A quick assessment is needed, and the community can prepare to do a windshield tour. There is no substitute for using your 5 senses in an assessment. Drive around the area and see for yourself what has happened. Get out of the car to get a feel for the area. What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you see? Have maps on hand of your area or your region. Seeing where the disaster affected area is in comparison to the surrounding areas can help you as the community look forward to planning for recovery. How will rebuilding the disaster area fit into the surrounding area that was affected? A city, county, or a state map may help to gain perspective of the area that you're trying to clean up and or rebuild. All of this information gathered can help you in the relief phase, and as you move into the recovery phase. Be sure to take photos, that's photos and videos of the area. This is where you will understand what has happened, where it has happened, and how extensive the damage is. Use the resources of people who know the ins and outs of the affected community. Newspapers and other local media are good resources to start with. From the news stories, you can find out what organizations are already involved. While you read the newspaper, you should look for members of the interfaith community, local interfaith alliances, and religious institutions. Reach out to civic groups and any organizations that may have something to contribute to the recovery process. Many people will be gathering information, including the local emergency management agency and the federal emergency management agency. Pay close attention to the announcements of these agencies, as they have many resources for survivors of the community. Community organizations and community leaders, including the faith community, may be able to provide some pertinent information. This is a great opportunity to create a good relationship with these agencies. The internet can give you quick results and answer many of your questions. I said earlier, read the newspaper, but we know that now we even read the newspaper online because we have the internet. This is a great place to look up information. And here are a few: Google Alerts, Disaster News Network, CNN, the Weather Channel, Web searches will give you a larger perspective on the area. Be sure to use credible sources. Stay up to date to what's happening in and around you. After the initial rescue, conversations are being held at all levels with local authorities, the fire chief, police, neighborhood groups, faith leaders, and volunteer leadership. These conversations with people from every part of the area that are affected on a regular basis will assist in identifying those needs, those who have needs and who needs it the most. Your local or state VOAD chairpersons or local volunteer organizations active in disaster members are all invaluable sources of information, and holding briefings and dispersing information that individuals, families, houses of worship, and others can use. Those conversations are certainly important. Finally, there will be communities gatherings convened by whether it's the mayor, the Red Cross, FEMA, VOADs, county officials, and others. Sometimes these meetings can produce more heat than light, but it can be a huge source of information because of who will be there. Some of these meetings will produce a lot of mixed emotions. Just get ready, such as anger, blame, and resentment. However, listen well. There's a lot of information under the surface. The information you have collected may now help the community determine how to move forward and provide those most vulnerable with much needed resources. What you need to know: the impact, the capacity. What are the community's strengths? How prepared was the community before the disaster? Who is already present in the community? These are questions that will help to determine the capacity of the team that may be already present and what may be needed. Community capacity can be evaluated and built upon. The best use of the capacity of the community will largely determine the success of disaster recovery in the long term. Knowing what faith communities are present, not just houses of worship, but faith-based missions, religious social groups, and so forth. Pastors, rabbis, and other faith leaders may know who has been affected. They can be a good source of information. What other pre-existing organizations normally serve the community? A few are listed above. There may be some that are present that we don't mention. Goodwill Industries or social service agencies such as Adult and Family Services can be a good place to start to look for people who have been affected. And you know the other organizations or nonprofit agencies that are in your community. We pause again for questions, and Suzanne, let me know if we have any questions.
Yes, we do have questions now. First question.
Okay.
Can you highlight any specific information on specific preparatory plans for churches or houses of worship? And we actually, through the Chalice Press, Amy Goop and Brendan Gilvan published the book Help and Hope, Disaster Preparedness Response Tools for Congregations. And that's really a wonderful book to give you a start on how you can prepare your churches, your houses of worship for disasters. And I believe Sandra has the link at the end of her presentation, but I will also type it into the answer box for all of you to have it available.
That's good, Suzanne, because just what you said I will be covering in a few slides going forward.
Great.
So we'll be able to share that with him.
Great. And the second question, what does CWS do proactively to coordinate with FEMA, VOAD, and NGOs? As you saw on the beginning of Sandra's presentation when she made you familiar with Church World Service, we have our regions of assignment. And in our regions, we participate in the FEMA calls, their quarterly meetings. We also participate in the national VOAD committees and the state VOAD calls. And of course, we try to be a good partner to all the different non-governmental agencies and interfaith agencies out there. So we try to do a lot of work pre-disaster, and it really comes down to everyone understanding what Church World Service stands for and what assistance Church World Service can provide. So I hope.
And thanks for that answer, Suzanne. And I would just share with the listeners here, and that is just this morning I spent 2 hours on a call with the Georgia VOAD, which was their quarterly call, and of course the FEMA Region Val was also present and other organizations, and so we have an opportunity to network and collaborate with them in these kind of ways as well.
The next question is VOAD when in May, New Orleans. And that's correct. The National Voluntary Organization Active in Disaster will have their annual meeting in May, and it's always in May 11th to May 15th in New Orleans. You can find registration information and lodging information at the National VOAD website. And again, I will post that link here after we answered your questions. I'll be happy to do that. Then we have what resources and suggestions are available to help senior living communities prepare for disasters. Again, I would say start off talking to your emergency manager, either your city or your county emergency manager, and definitely start talking to your local Red Cross. I know the first thing you definitely need to consider is if you need to evacuate, how will you be able to get all the people in your care to the appropriate shelter? Medications, as Sandra pointed out, everything that was on that list for personal preparedness in a senior living facility, you also need to have these all checked off. But I would start off by talking to your emergency manager or reaching out to your local Red Cross and to discuss with them is there assistance? Do they have a plan for your facility in case you need to evacuate and bring everybody to the shelter? So I think that's a good idea, a good starting point hopefully for you. And then we have who takes the lead in assessments. So you don't have 40 groups bugging the same sources of potential information. I like the 40 groups. Unfortunately, in our experience, and I'm sure Sandra will agree, communities often experience just the opposite. They don't have the assessment numbers they need, especially when it comes to forming a long-term recovery group. They really struggle, in my experience, to get those numbers. Who has been affected? What really is the damage? Have these houses been destroyed, or what will the cost of repairs be? We, of course, our good partners is World Renew. They have a wonderful database to do community assessment, and they can come in for a week and 2 weeks and assess. They either have a center where people come in and fill out forms, or they go door to door But of course, being a voluntary organization, they can't provide that service to every community in the nation that has been affected by a disaster. And then you have numbers often, if it's presidentially declared, you will have numbers from FEMA that can help you in regard to applications and damage assessments. Sometimes you have some state numbers. But often the opposite is actually true, that it's very, very hard for long-term recovery groups to really get a good assessment and a good understanding of what the need is and who are the most vulnerable in the community that really need the help.
Suzanne, I'd just like to add that immediately following a disaster, you do have a few entities that will take on the responsibility of assessing for the community. Of course, your local emergency management and operations center are very much quick to try and collect information, make an assessment for the purposes of the local community, as well as passing that information on to the state and then the federal entity. You also have the American Red Cross, who does a damage assessment immediately following disaster, trying to determine who will need assistance. Now, when I talked about the first assessment is going to involve the total community, meaning whether it's people's homes, lives, the infrastructure, and so forth. The Red Cross does it based on the number of households. You would then have other entities who are out there and able to provide information for the assessment purpose. And that's why in one of the slides I shared with you that collect as much information as you can, and in your gatherings, as we pointed out, you'll be able to share that information and numbers start to flow.
That's right. So I hope that answered that question. Then we have the question window does not seem to be live. I'm not quite sure what that means. In the absence of a current CWS representative, how does CWS provide coverage of the Western states? And I imagine that refers to the loss of Joanne Hale. We have tried, all three of us, Barry, Sandra, and I, to keep an eye on everything that happens in the Northeast. And the Western states, I actually have quite a few of the Western states. That area is covered as good as we can. We really try to look at the whole nation in regard to response, and if there is ever any lack on our part or CWS assistance should be required, please contact us. Let us know, and we'll be more than happy to assist. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if we can do anything in the aftermath of a disaster. You are commenting about the wide variety of local capabilities that affect disaster resources. Does anyone have a system for evaluating local capabilities pre-disaster? That is actually something that again in your emergency manager, the Salvation Army, the Red Cross, all the organizations that are usually involved in the immediate response and the pre-planning phase could probably help you answer to see where is your community really as far as planning. I know the Red Cross spends a tremendous amount of pre-planning, identifying shelters, you know, who can prepare the food, you know, who can they partner with if they need more cots immediately, and so on. Again, I would start off with your local emergency manager. And as far as I see, Sandra, those are all the questions right now. And again, I will write the information on the WOED and Help and Hope in the answer box for everybody.
Well, thanks, Suzanne, and thanks to those who asked those questions. Again, as Suzanne said, you have our contact information, and if you need further clarification from what we presented here today, our webinar will be recorded, as well as you can contact us. And yes, we're covering all of the area as much as we can that was covered by Joanne. I am in communication and participation in New Jersey on the East Coast, which was also Joanne Hill's area. So we're trying to cover it as much as possible right now until there is a replacement for that position. Okay, thank you. And let's move forward and continue. As we've been talking about what we needed to know, we talked about the impact and the capacity, as well as the who's there, the agencies, the faith-based community. Be sure to look for the most vulnerable. Don't forget to take a look at homeless shelters, food bank, and other places where vulnerable populations may be. Those are places that can share with you what the need might be. Now that we have gathered information from various sources in town, you must know how to sort it based on your own good judgment. And we're talking about the community now. The community will have to decipher what is most important and work on your way down to the least important. And that's what I said about all of this information assessment and gathering coming together. Then you got to take the information and then prioritize it. Of course, you must validate all your information and seek multiple sources. Throughout the process, you must continue to update it. Keep your updated information readily available. It will be useful as you respond to emergencies and then move into the relief and then finally into the recovery phase. Gathering information from various sources in town, verify those sources and keep them handy so that they can assist in early responders in making a decision on where to target their response activities, including food, clothing, household items, cleaning buckets, medical supplies, baby kits, urgent temporary repairs, and bulk distribution. Please take note that there may be some barriers to getting what you need to get to the people. Engaging the community in prior planning should minimize the barriers to timely and appropriate relief to those affected by the disaster. Now, somebody asked the question just a minute ago, is how do you make the plans before? Again, I repeat this one and say that engaging the community in prior planning should minimize the barriers to timely and appropriate relief to those affected by the disaster. In a few minutes, I will go over some slides that cover faith-based groups, while the slides thereafter cover national nonprofit organizations. This is an excellent way to start researching for who does what before and after disaster, and in your planning for the development of your long-term recovery. Okay. Now, no matter what your belief, choice, and place of worship might be, all of us are vulnerable and need to exercise a method of planning for the hazards that exist within our local, regional, and geographical area. A local church or house of worship should begin now preparing for what might happen in the future as it relates to disaster response and recovery. This will also include an acceptance and understanding of what role the church will play and who will they serve, its members, the whole community, vulnerable groups, etc. Being engaged with the local interfaith groups local volunteer organizations active in disaster, those are your VOADs, and other intra-agency networks helps jumpstart your recovery activities. Engaging with these groups early on will help provide for the framework necessary to effectively engage in recovery. In long-term recovery, every effort is made, especially by the faith community, to address the needs of the family from a holistic approach, looking at various needs of families other than the physical rebuilding of their homes. In the process of determining what you will do, here are some action items houses of worship might consider to ensure you are ready and responsive before, during, and following a disaster. Your plan can be as extensive as you deem necessary, but it should include provisions that will lead your membership and the community to becoming more resilient. A number of resources are available to assist you. Some of these will be shared with you later in the presentation. However, you would want to begin by looking at internal resources, whether it's money, materials, or muscle that your entity has available. So you see the steps. Identify the hazards, identify the resources, develop a disaster plan, communicate the plan to your members, exercise the plan, engage denominational leads, engage local partners. These are steps that you can take in your preparedness. As mentioned by Suzanne in responding to a question, we have a new resource that's sponsored by CWS and the Week of Compassion is this book co-edited by Amy Goff and Brandon Gilbin. Help and Hope, Disaster Preparedness and Response Tools for Congregations is one of the featured books on the Chalice Press website, and you have that website in front of you. You may also find information including how to order the book at our website. Help and Hope book, our Associate Director, Barry Shade, and myself have co-authored chapters in the book, as well as other familiar disaster responses from our member communions. And in this book, there is a section in the book entitled The Congregational Toolkit that includes very practical and concrete recommendations for you. Congregations can help their members prepare for disasters utilizing this toolkit and the checklist, which is also included in this publication. And just in case you did not get the information, I will back up and show you that information, how to find the book. Again, as we move forward, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to you within 48 hours after this presentation. As stated early on, prepare yourself for the disaster that can happen using information given earlier. Collect yourself and acknowledge the disaster has happened. Using whatever means of communication available, listen out for information on what to do to get assistance. Also pay close attention to any health and safety information shared. Note any information given regarding distribution sites, assistance centers, etc. Adhere to all of the information regarding necessary paperwork and documentation, especially person identification, and gather the same before proceeding to apply for any type of assistance. These are some quick personal aids to relief and recovery. Quickly identify and assess the resources of a case management group that can assist you in the process. Normally, the Red Cross may be the first contact for assistance that families can access because of their emergency assistance program. Other organizations, Catholic Charities USA, Salvation Army, St. Vincent de Paul, and others might also be quickly accessed. The case manager can be a guide for you and may be able to develop a long-term relationship with you if and when a long-term recovery group develops. If needed, various faith groups and houses of worship will be available to provide you with the spiritual and emotional support needed to help you cope with this disaster. If declared, contact FEMA right away to assess the resources of the federal government and follow their lead to move through their sequence of delivery. It is your primary responsibility to recover from any disaster, and if needed, other resources will aid you. Therefore, use your personal resources, your insurance, your savings, your normal income, etc., first to meet your needs. Spend wisely your personal resources and any other resources given to you. This hopefully will have you to avoid duplication and or disqualification for further assistance or benefits. Know your community. Once you have all the systems and supplies, all the tools and equipment, the signage, and the survival flash drives in order, it is the time to focus on what is perhaps the most important aspect of disaster preparedness, knowing your community. Since no single group can do this by themselves, everything that needs to be done to help a community recover, building relationships with others in the community, is the best starting point. Assessing your community for potential collaborators, expertise, and resource helps the congregation begin to understand how the community is most susceptible and how to build resilience and a specific disaster plan. If connections have not been made in your community before the disaster, it is a struggle to get organized in the midst of chaos. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, many individuals and congregations want to help and will rush to take action, as we have noted previously. But our question remains, how do we best help? Without pre-planning, and your efforts could not only be ineffective, but even detrimental to the recovery efforts. Resources that have been identified in advance will set up a more efficient process and system and will also enable good stewardship. So how to assess your community? We've already talked about defining your community geographically. Is it your neighborhood, city, or town, or country, or something else? What makes up your particular context? Then, depending on how you define your community, catalog your resources. As you build relationships, work together to develop resources, create a plan and develop a network that is poised to respond to the community's need. Forge relationships across the ecumenical spectrum, across religious traditions, and with your local emergency management agency and other governmental bodies such as FEMA. Government agencies are the first responders, and they will manage and control access to the disaster site often. Establish relationship with social service agencies, disaster response organizations such as VOED, the American Red Cross, and Church World Service. Make the assets, map the assets in your community. What are the gifts, skills, and capabilities of individuals within your community or their neighborhood, organizations, clubs, or social groups that would be helpful to include? What are the other formal structures and institutions within the community? The schools, the key businesses, healthcare resources, and economic development resources. It is also important to assess the physical and social vulnerabilities in your community, which may be exacerbated even more during a disaster. In essence, one of the most key ways to prepare for disaster is to know your community, establish relationships, build a network, map the assets of your community so that you are able to best respond when crisis happens. As I promised earlier, I would share with you some resources and groups that are disaster responders that you would want to get to know before disaster. These are some of the faith-based organizations that can help after disaster. There are a few bullet points under each with a brief summary of what they do. You may not be able to write all of it down, but of course the slides will be available after the presentation. Some of these organizations provide emergency relief after disaster, but may also assist as the community is ready to move into recovery. In coordination with your state VOAD and your FEMA VAL, invite the local regional representatives of these organizations. These organizations might be able to address unmet needs that FEMA may not be able to assist with. Additional listings of the faith community: World Renew, Church of the Brethren, and more. Again, do not try to write this down. At your leisure, you can go to our website and retrieve this information if you desire to have it. This is a list of our member denominations. This list continues also on the next slide. With the help of these churches, CWS is able to carry out its mission. Take a look to see if there is a denomination near your area. It is a good idea to become acquainted with the faith-based community to see what they can offer in times of disaster. These are our domestic and international partners. Some work only domestically, others only international. However, some of these denominations work both domestically and internationally. Take a look at the nonprofit organizations listed on the next few slides. Some of them are you already know, and others may be some that you may not have heard of or have forgotten. They are good resources in the time of disaster. This completes our list of nonprofit organizations. And Suzanne, we can now ask for additional questions if we have them.
No additional questions at this time, Sandra.
Oh, great. This webinar has highlighted some tips and procedures that you might consider. However, there are various resources available that can provide you with detailed information and instructions to help you prepare to mitigate the effects of disaster that a disaster will have on you, your family, your place of worship, and your community. Here are just a few resources you can refer to for disaster preparedness. National VOAD has a brand new committee on community preparedness. Red Cross has been in the preparedness business for a long time. FEMA, as a part of Homeland Security, seeks to support mitigation activities on behalf of our communities. There are various other resources accessible for individual, family, and communities preparedness. The question comes back, are you ready? This is to introduce to you Barry Shade, our Associate Director, and his contact information that may have been shared with you earlier. This is Suzanne Gilmore, who has so graciously handled all of the questions that we've had today. Thanks, Suzanne. This is yours truly. You can follow us on Facebook. So as we conclude this webinar, thank you for your participation today. Again, the webinar recording will be made available in approximately 48 hours at www.cwsglobal.org/LTR webinars, as you see above. Thank you for your attendance and participation in this webinar. Please join us for future webinars. We'll present long-term recovery basics April the 14th, 2015. We'll be emailing you closer to the date with registration information. We'll send you registration details soon, or you may find CWS webinar information at cwsglobal.org/LTR webinars. Again, thank you for your participation today, and this concludes our webinar.